Welcome to another episode of Retrospective Gaming. In this episode, I am reviewing Albion. This is a game that came out late in the DOS era, 1995 to be exact, and it went under the radar. It doesn't really get that much attention. You know how I am, this is Retrospective Gaming, so I decided to give this game some attention. I must warn you, there are minor spoilers in this game, and I might pronounce some of the names wrong. I'll do my best, but there are some weird sounding names in this game, so hey, what can you do? Now, here is my review of Albion. The story starts off with the main character, Tom Driscoll, being tasked with exploring the world of Albion. The story starts off with the main character, Tom Driscoll. He is tasked with exploring a world named Albion. This game takes place in the future, specifically 2227. And you are tasked with exploring this world to find resources and info, because apparently that's what people think is on there. Just stuff to take and nothing else. After you depart, your ship, known as the Toronto, crashes, and Tom figures out that Albion is filled with life. It's not a barren wasteland, it actually has different species, cultures, and climates to discover. Naturally, when you're dealing with intelligent species, you also get caught up in their political issues, personal issues, and more. Unfortunately, since Tom's ship crashed, he has to find it, so this leaves him stuck and stranded on Albion. He has to traverse his way through different areas to find the Toronto and possibly make connections for his people and the different species and try to get everyone to get along or to probably make some trades. You know how it is when it comes to being diplomats. He just has to wait to try and make a connection between all these species and his people. And that's how Albion starts off. The main character Tom is stranded on this world that is foreign to him, and he has to find a way through it and survive and do a whole bunch more. You're in for a long ride. I honestly did not know what to expect from this game. I read some things about it before but never really looked into it, so I went in 100% blind, and I was amazed at the scope of Albion's world, but I'll get back to that a bit later. I thought the story was good. I like the interactions between Tom and the inhabitants of the different areas he goes to. It's not just about finding your spaceship, it's also about making connections and trying to establish a certain understanding between these species and Tom and his people. Tom did not expect to find life in these areas, and now he has to make contact and try to find a way back to his people, and that means communicating and cooperating with anyone he runs into that might have some information. And that's what kept me coming back for the 40 plus hours I put into this game. The attention to detail and how different this game is. I was expecting to see a gnome or some creature we are used to seeing in the game with fantasy elements, but not in Albion. Right in the beginning, in an area called Narcanati, I went there and I saw a bunch of creatures with their own language. They sort of look like tall brown grasshoppers, and these intelligent creatures are called the Ascari. They have their own political structure, cultures, rituals, etc. And one of their citizens ends up in your party. He is one hell of a tank. This is the strong point of Albion's storytelling. It's the background and world that the developers created, exploring the different areas and ways of life, trying to find your ship, and finding out what happens once you get back to your people and try to tell them all about your different contacts with alien life, and the fact that the different species are unique and not just some generic troll, gnome, or other fantasy creatures helps too. It's truly engrossing. There are a lot of good things about the story. Discovery, political infighting, different cultures, and just taking in the lore of these unique species that were made for this game. I also like how the areas are connected to each other. In some games, including games I absolutely love, the areas are interesting and they have a lot of nice lore and quests, but sometimes they don't connect to each other, and it seems like you're in different worlds instead of one world with a whole bunch of areas in it. In Albion, the different areas are connected to each other even up to the climax. Now, I'm not saying the writing is bad because I thought the writing was fine. It's not anything phenomenal or mind-blowing, but it gets the job done. But it's the writing that's in the backdrop of this world with all these unique species that were made for the game that really bumps everything up and made me enjoy it a lot. It's very unique and creative, and that's Albion's strong point. My main issue with the story is the antagonist at the end game. Right from the start, you see unique species and things that aren't conventional in your typical fantasy game with sci-fi elements, but when you get near the end, I was a bit underwhelmed by the antagonist. It felt generic for a game that really doesn't follow generic tropes when it comes to the story and background. I just want to clarify something. I'm not saying that everything in this game is 100% unique and something we've never seen before. No, that's something that's impossible to do. What I'm trying to say is that the developers went out their way to really try to make their own world and didn't rely on a lot of fantasy tropes like generic species that we see, trolls, elves, etc., and other stuff. There are some things in this game that will remind you of other games, like different spells that we've seen in every fantasy game, and some creatures might look similar to other creatures, but overall they really tried to give it their own unique fingerprint and identity. That's what I'm trying to say, and that's something you don't see in every game. That doesn't necessarily make it a bad or a good game. There's a lot of great games out there that have a lot of generic stuff or stuff we've seen before, but it's how you tell the story writing. All this unique stuff could be for nothing if the game is shit. Thankfully, Albion is a good game. Now, I have another issue with the story, but this is a minor one. The game is kind of linear. It's not 100% linear, but it is kind of. There are some secrets you can discover and other things, but I would have loved to see more side quests in this game. I mean, this world is so interesting, and I just would have liked to see a bit more stuff to do. But these issues really didn't affect my enjoyment of the story. I played from beginning to end and I enjoyed it all the way through. It's really a unique, interesting game. It's a very vibrant game. It's underrated and I think more people should play this. There are 3 ways you play Albion. Number 1, when you're wandering around the world, you see it in an isometric overhead view. Number 2, when you're in towns or you explore dungeons, you're in first person, so it reminds you of a game like Dungeon Master or Might and Magic. When you enter these dungeons or towns, it's first person. And when you enter a fight, a grid pops up and it gives you commands and you make movements and you play it out just like a dungeon crawler. When you execute these actions, you see everything in first person. You see attacks go like magic or anything like that. If you played games like Shining Force, Lands of Lore, Might and Magic, or Wizardry, this will be familiar to you. There's a certain level of planning when it comes to combat. You set up positions on this grid, and when you enter a fight, you can't use healing potions or many potions or anything like that. You can use certain magical weapons, but that's about it. So once you're in a battle, you have to rely on the skills that your characters have, whether it's mages or someone that really knows how to use a bow, because you can't just chug down potions whenever you get in trouble. And this is a small thing, but it changes the dynamic of every battle, especially if you're used to playing certain RPGs or some modern ones where you can just use any item at any time, even in combat. I will admit that I'm not the best at this game. I beat it, but I'm not really great at it. I just had a hard time keeping my mages alive in some battles. They kept on dying, and I relied on one character to be a tank and take most of the damage. That's how he's designed to be, but he carried the party throughout some of the battles, especially in the beginning. I was relying on the character Dur a lot. His name is Dirr, and I probably said it wrong, but he was a blessing in disguise, especially in the beginning and throughout the whole game. He's really useful. It's easy to get ganged up on in battle, especially for your weaker characters. If you're fighting 4 or 5 enemies or maybe more, they can easily swarm the weaker characters and kill, especially if they're low level or they don't have decent equipment. And the thing is, especially the way the grid is, your characters have limited movements. It's not like they can jump up 7 paces and stay away from the enemy, or jump to the other side of the grid. No, they can move 1 step at a time and do 1 action. And this can be a pain in the ass if you don't know what you're doing. So I'm not going to fault the game for that. My characters, the mages, were dying really fast when I first got them because I just didn't know how to play them until the middle of the game. I was just relying on one character to kind of like carry the rest of the party. So I can't fault the game for that. It took me a while to understand it, but there might be a bit of a learning curve for this grid system. For most players, if you're used to like dungeon crawlers and games like Wizardry or Might and Magic, this probably will be a piece of cake for you, but it took me a while to understand it. Your skills are limited in this game. For most characters, there's only 2 choices, long range or close range. And for the mage characters, when they level up, they can learn more advanced skills, pretty basic stuff. and when your characters level up, you get training points, and you have to go to a trainer and level up your close range or long range, or if you're a mage, you can get better skills. There's not much freedom in how you develop your characters. They're preset. There's some choices, like you can make some characters maybe long range and use bows or use swords, but other than that, there's not really much you can do. Like I said before, Albion is linear in some ways, but that's just the way the game is. I enjoyed it. Now, when you go into dungeons, there are some puzzles and some things you can do. I wouldn't say they're very complex, but there was one puzzle that was really cool. It involved stepping on different colored tiles, and if you fucked up, the dungeon would unleash some powerful creatures to attack you, and if you kept fucking up, you'd have to fight more powerful creatures. So that one was pretty clever. There's also cool little stuff like fireballs roaming around, and you can't get hit by it because it does a lot of damage, and some traps. So it's pretty basic stuff. I wouldn't say any of them are too complex, but the colored tiled puzzle was pretty cool. I enjoyed that one. Since Albion came out in the 90s, there are some elements that people might consider old school or hardcore. Everything that you carry has a weight, even gold and food, and when you're talking to people, there is a word system. When you talk to someone, you can type in words to get more information, or it'll pop up when you ask them about it. And this is crucial. You have to talk to people, and you have to say certain words to get more information about something. This is crucial to advancing the storyline. If you don't do this, you could get stuck in certain areas, and this happened to me. I was doing a quest, and I thought the game was glitched, or I couldn't, just something happened and I couldn't beat the game. But I figured out that I had to go to that person and ask them about that specific subject. Even though I knew what was going on, I had to ask them about it for the game to let me advance. So you have to pay attention. This is pretty old school. It's not as old school where you gotta type everything down or jot everything down, no, but there are certain points where you have to know the right keywords in order to get the information. I don't have many problems with the gameplay. I had no problems with the grid system. I do wish there were more tank characters in this game, like more characters that are based on taking hits, and maybe more warriors, because this game is very mage heavy. And I like that because I love playing mages, but since I'm not too familiar with this grid system and it took me a while to get it, I wish there was more optional characters that were tanks. There are some, but not as much as I would have expected. But as you probably figured out now, I don't have too many problems with the game. I do have some, as I explained before, but I think this is a really underrated game overall. The strongest thing about Albion is its atmosphere. Going through all the new areas, discovering, finding new cultures. I know what some of you are saying. Aren't most games like that? You want to discover them. Of course, but what I mean is, you don't start off in an area that's going to be an established location for you. It's not about staying in areas the character already knows about and just dealing with the issues there and learning more. The main character starts his journey off by crashing into an area he doesn't know, nor does the people that send him off there know about. They don't know anything about it. He is traveling into the unknown to try and establish contact and get back to his ship, and thankfully the developers pulled this off. When I traveled through Albion, the first thing I noticed was how vibrant and colorful the world is. It's very detailed. The first area you go to is a civilization in the middle of a wild, dangerous jungle with old bridges, rivers, and weird looking bushes. Weird insects and bugs too. I don't know how else to explain it, but it's very distinct and vibrant. I'm impressed by the level of detail in the areas, and this is a late DOS era game and it still holds up. The graphics may be outdated, but the art style and the colors, it's still a beautiful game 20 years later. Another thing I was really impressed by is the way the inside of the buildings look. On the island of Narcanati, when you go inside, it's literally buildings made out of plants. Kind of like an echo dome, but in a building. You see big things that are water fountains with streams, and walls literally made out of thick grass. One of my favorite areas is the island DG Cantos. This is a mysterious area and has a good amount of lore and background to it. I especially liked hearing the conversations about unknown gods and the enlightened ones. This game is a joy to discover and just try to piece everything together. It's history too. Another one of my favorite moments was learning about the Ascari Culture. They have some weird rituals and lifespans, and when you figure out how they try to live past their lifespans, it's very fucking odd and just a bit weird, and when I read that I was like, okay, that's pretty fucked up, but I'm not going to spoil it. I mean, looking at their houses, you can just tell they're a bit odd from everyone else, but I find their species fascinating. They look like basketball players in alien form. I don't know why. I guess because they're very tall. But the world is very detailed. Druid buildings, villages, deserts, jungles, spaceship, and it has a lot of variety too. It's a beautiful game, and it doesn't matter how you look at it, whether you have to look at it in first person mode or an overhead isometric view. I noticed it immediately, wandering around and seeing the vibrant, colorful Isle of DG Cantos. It jumps out at you, the different colors of the plant life, the little lines in the water that shows that it's flowing, the waterfall, and more. And when you go into dungeons and you run into fears and all the different traps and the different little symbols that hover around, it's just a beautiful game. I've repeated that like 7 times, but it's for a reason. I want you to know that it's a beautiful game. So I think you know my opinion about how good it looks. But another strong point about the atmosphere is it makes you feel like you're on a grand epic adventure. It makes you feel like you're exploring a huge world, the way you have to travel between the different areas, but everything still stays connected. I can forgive a game if the areas seem disconnected to each other. As long as it's good, I can forgive it. But I don't have to worry about that when I played Albion, because the areas are connected. No matter how different they are, and you're exploring this huge world, everything stays connected to each other with the storyline too. As far as the music, I enjoyed the music and the sound effects. Don't really have a problem with it. I really like the intro, the space theme, and the fortress theme that pops up later on in the game when you're dealing with the prison areas. So yeah, it fits in perfectly with the game, and I enjoyed it. You'll hear some of my favorite tracks in the background of this video, so you know what I like. So overall, I recommend Albion. It's an underrated game. It's a gem from the 90s. It's a late era DOS game that did the platform proud. I heard that there was supposed to be a sequel, and if they were planning on one, if that's true, it sucks that they never made another Albion game. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think about this. If you want to leave a comment, you know how to get into contact with me. Have a great day.